thank you very much for coming to share your brains with my brain. And also I'd really like to just acknowledge the country that we're on and all of the ancestors of this country and all of the Indigenous and non-Indigenous elders, past, present and emerging, because I always feel much better when I do that. So what we're doing today is we're going to talk about brain health, which is such an amazing area. And obviously I'm no neurologist, but I have had a very big interest in brain health since I first heard about neuroplasticity about 15 years ago and was very excited about it. So I'd like to unpack that a little bit down the line. When we're talking about brain health and brain disease, there's obviously a whole range of things within that. You know, in brain ill health, there's the mood disorders like anxiety and depression. There's also psychiatric disorders such as schizophrenia, but then there's also the neurological disorders such as Alzheimer's and diabetes. And I guess, although what I'll be speaking about is how do we keep our brain well, I'll probably focus a little bit more on the dementia element of that spectrum, just because 25 minutes is a pretty short period of time to give you much. But what I do mention and the 6 tips that I give you will actually give you help for all of those other issues as well, because it's the same brain, obviously. So I want to give you a little bit of context before I get into the content, because I think that we all have a different approach at things, and I want to explain a little bit about my approach towards health and wellness and why it is that this is such an important aspect. I before I was a naturopath, I was an environmental activist, and I got to a point of frustration with the lack of action on the very, very dangerous blind spots that we live our lives with, such as putting poison on food or having single-use plastics that come out of the ground, get a whole heap of processors used once and then thrown into the bin. Just these blind spots which are actually killing us. And I recognized at my time at Greenpeace and Planet Ark how, wow, it's a money thing. It's not a life-affirming choice that we're making. It's a single-line profit-making, a decision-making process, that our whole paradigm, our whole way of thinking is based along this erroneous way of thinking that's kind of taking us down a path that leads us to this moment, which is an incredibly crucial moment for all of us individually and collectively. So I'm sure most of you would agree with that. And I kind of came to a point of like, okay, what I can do as an environmental activist is shallow, because we're bringing awareness to people, but people aren't actually activating it. Some people are, but the system is so huge and so perpetuating this really destructive way of living that I'd be better off going doing what I always wanted to do, which was being a naturopath. So then I studied naturopathy. And I guess during that as well, it was almost like recognizing that individual health and global health, there's no real difference between those things in my mind. So when I come at, you can look after your health, your neurons, your nerve cells, your whole nervous system, and the health of your brain, you're also actually looking after the health of everyone in your immediate community. You're also looking after the health of the planet by being able to be more conscious about what you're consuming, being able to be more aware of the implications of everything that you're doing, but also being more empowered to create a regenerative way of living, and a way of which is much more joyous, actually, than the way we're living now. So essentially that's my intention behind what I do, and I just wanted to put that out there so that you could understand more from where I'm coming from. The other thing that's really struck me, even though I've been practicing for a long time, it's only really coming to the fore in the last few years, is just how profoundly powerful natural medicine is. So we always think of natural medicine as like gentle and, really gently, slowly helping you. But actually I find the more I work with this, how incredibly powerful and how incredibly transformational natural healing and natural medicines are. Yes, pharmaceutical medicines have a fantastic place in emergency medicine and in pain control, and there are things that actually are fantastic for the pharmaceutical medicines to an extent, but natural medicines are, the more I work with them, the more powerful they are, and that's not just the herbs and the nutrients. It's also the lifestyle approaches that we can take, which are medicine in themselves. So we have to get away from that idea of it being a pill or a substance. It can be a not doing, actually, which is as a natural healing medicine. Okay. So brain health. So when we think about the brain, we have to think not just about this phenomenal physiological mechanism which has billions of cells and trillions of interconnecting points. So a brain cell is a phenomenal looking cell. If anyone's not aware of it, it's like instead of it being a round cell, it's kind of like this cell body with the nucleus. The cell body is kind of like, has all of these appendages, and from those appendages come all these little fibrils, and then it has this very, very long axon. It's called a long tail, and at the end of the tail there are all these little, like a cat of nine tails, a whole heap of little things. So all of those end bits are connecting with other nerve cell end bits, and so when a nerve impulse goes through the body, it's a bioelectrical kind of sequence that runs down the nerve, and then it'll join another nerve, trigger it, and goes to another nerve, and it goes to another nerve. This pathway is called a neuropathway, yeah? And who's heard of neuroplasticity? Right. So neuroplasticity has two elements to it. One is that we're regenerating these brain cells. Previously, 15, 20 years ago, we thought once we lost the brain cells, that was it. We didn't get more. But actually what happens is our brain cells are continually being regenerated inside, as far as I understand, inside the central part of where the spine meets the brain, and there's this fluid in the cerebral spinal fluid. There these little brain cells, these stem cells are coming out, and we have 3 weeks to be able to map them somewhere in the brain. And mapping them means getting them to connect in to other parts. And the neuroplasticity part is the plastic, so it's the capacity for the the way in which it can meld together, like plasticine. You can mold it, so you can actually mold those brain cells to be able to map into places. So that's neuroplasticity. So it's 2 parts. One is that there's stem cells. One is that we can map those stem cells into a pathway. So we all have one of these brains, and we all have the capacity to sculpt and mold our brain. So this concept of a mosaic brain that is constantly being regenerated and constantly being, well, not just regenerated, but it's becoming more complex, becoming more sophisticated. We're learning and developing more wisdom, and this is like seen as a more of the way in which those dendrites, which are the ends of the cells, are basically moving through the matter of the brain. So it's a very exciting thing to have a human brain, a very, very exciting thing. When you come to recognize, you can actually shift that around. So we know that this does not stop happening, this neuroregeneration. There's a woman called Jean Clement, and she's the oldest. I think she's passed away now, but when she was 118, she had a bunch of neurologists working with her for 6 months. She'd normally kind of live in this little, like a little room, like an old person. We put our elders and isolate them in this little room. So she was fairly isolated, and then she got this team of people coming in to study her. And over the 6 months that she was studied, because she was getting all this attention and all this thing, her neuroplasticity increased, her brain increased, even at 118. So it does not stop, yeah? Our capacity for regeneration doesn't slow down with age. But we do have an issue with aging, obviously. Could anyone put their hands up if they know someone who has dementia or has had dementia? All right, so that's probably about 50%. Could you keep your hands up? Put your hands up. And now keep your hands up if that person was a woman. All right, so almost all of the hands stayed up. What a very, very staggering, put your hands down now, thanks. A staggering statistic is that dementia or dementia-oriented or dementia-associated illnesses kill more Australian women than any other disease. So this is ABS 2017. So it's kind of significant. You think, whoa, that's pretty scary. People over 60, 20% of them have some sort of dementia orientation about them. That's a fifth of the population at 60, and we're going to be living till 80 or longer. So this is a really, it's a burgeoning public health issue, but it's also harrowing for those of you who know people who've had dementia, then how harrowing it is to watch someone lose their identity and lose their sense of self. You know, it's an absolutely horrible, horrible thing. And yet we also know that 2/3 of those dementia cases can be prevented. So we can actually prevent them by looking at the risk factors and modifying those risk factors. There was a paper that I read, there were 18 main risk factors. There are 96 in total which have some influence, 18 which have good evidence. And of course the evidence is only coming about through the investment in getting the evidence as well. Okay, so that's also sometimes is a bit of a hazy thing around natural therapies. So does hydration help? Well, no one's studied it. There's no evidence for that. But of course it would help because your brain is in a fluid body. So what happens with dehydration? We don't know for sure. There's no evidence for it. You know, this is a really a bit of a bugbear in my life. But what we know what happens with the aging brain is the aging brain starts to shrink. So we see it in scans that the aging brain starts to shrink. And what that is often is a lack of these neural pathways connecting. I like the analogy of a tree. So if you imagine a beautiful tree and all of the leaves are very, very in full, you know, foliage, and there's a lot of connections going on. So if you think of the network of the brain as this tree with lots of leaves on it, what happens as we age is some of those leaves start to fall off. And so the neural pathways, instead of having this very, very sophisticated and intricate and elaborate network of connections to it, it starts to get more of a single line to it. Does that make sense? It kind of that, so I'll explain that a little bit more. So I think another thing is, so we do know that the brain shrinks and that these neural pathways start to not fall away, but they start to become less as we age, generally speaking, right? The other thing that I feel, and I think is an interesting concept to play with, is that when we age, we get a little bit fixed in our ways, a little bit sort of, this is the way it's done. I'll always do it like this. I just, this is it. You know, this is my mind. My mind is made up around this issue. I'm here, and this is it. And then whatever we repeat along this neural pathway becomes more and more ingrained. So if we repeat something, you know, I'm hopeless at such and such. I'm hopeless at such and such. I'm hopeless, and we keep doing that for however long. Normally, 3 weeks we'll start to really get it in there. You know, 3 months, 3 to 6 months, they say, kind of really makes that neural pathway happen. Then that means that, yeah, sure enough, you will be, because you've made that, and you've got this track, and that's your default track to go back into as well. I wonder about this aging population, and if there's kind of like this lack of, there's kind of like I don't know, they just sort of get a bit relaxed and they stop trying, you know, and then they fall into those neural pathways, which are so easy to, and they're so ingrained. Thank you for the word. So there are many ways of helping our brain to stay sophisticated and stay fresh and stay alive and stay healthy. I'm going to mention just 6, and I'm going to actually put them into 2 camps. And I hope that you won't stop with those 6, that you'll continue to look into it. And certainly I will be, and one of the courses that I'm working on now is around this, because it's such an interesting and such an important aspect of your own lives and of the lives of your family and the lives of all of us. So the first group, I'm going to group them into 3 and 3. The first group is essentially actions that allow for consolidation and mapping in the brain. So allow the brain to rest and to rejuvenate and make sense of what's just happened, and to be able to really create those neural pathways. So if we think about our world where it's like so on 24/7, you know, who knows what Wi-Fi is doing? Like that's a whole talk. I do have a colleague who works in that space, and what I've heard is like, oh my gosh. But certainly turn your mobile phones off when you go to sleep, or airplane mode, definitely. But we're so like our attention's being drawn everywhere outside of ourselves so regularly, you know, we just kind of totally, like these mobile phones are just such a phenomenon. So 3 things that you can do every day that are going to help. One is daydream. So daydream isn't thinking about something, and it's not daydreaming over Facebook or Instagram. It's just daydreaming. It's no pressure with the daydream. It's just sitting back and folding the washing, daydreaming, or doing the dishes, daydreaming, or waiting for a bus, daydreaming. Just dreaming and allowing your brain to venture off into wherever it wants to go. And just allowing that fantasy world, like look at the way little kids and how happy they are. They daydream all the time. Well, not all the time, but they daydream a lot, yeah? And we learn not to daydream. What they've found when they do, when they've done studies with people with dementia is that they'll show them that there's people with dementia and people and healthy brains people are shown like a yellow square and then a red triangle or whatever. And when they interview the demented person about what they saw, they say, I saw a yellow square. Or what they thought about is, I thought about the yellow square, because I saw the yellow square and all I thought about was the yellow square. The person who had the healthy mind said, oh yeah, I saw the yellow square and then I thought about the sunset that I saw on Koh Phangan that night, and then I thought about the meal that we had after that, and I thought maybe I could make that tonight. So that's the study that's showing what's happening with the demented brain is that they become very in the moment, that it's just here. Like it's almost Zen-like in a way. There's a level of spirituality that could be, it could be suggested with that, but it's the lacking of that sophisticated mapping isn't there. So the idea of daydreaming and just nourishing those connections and allowing yourself to daydream, I think is a very, very important aspect of enriching your neural circuitry. So yeah, remembering that tree with all of the leaves. So you're actually allowing those leaves to continue to grow. And then the second thing is that I'd suggest is napping, having a nap. Have a nap. Everyone should have a nap. So the studies are showing that with your circadian rhythm, so of course, your cortisol comes up and your melatonin comes down as you wake up in the morning and you're trailing along and that's all good. If you wake up about 7, then you're going to probably like to have a little nap around about 2. You might not, but around 2, 1:30 to 2:30 or 3 is a good time if you're waking up around that time in the circadian rhythm thing. Don't nap for more than 20 minutes though. So put your phone on or put your timer on to basically wake up 20 minutes later. And that way, even if you just sort of dip into the melatonin and even just slip into whatever it is that we do when we're sleeping, then the melatonin that's released from the pineal gland, which is the key antioxidant of the body, will help to repair and rejuvenate your brain like nothing else can. Nothing else can do it the same way. So having a nap is a great idea, and you'll come back so much more refreshed than anything else you could do in 20 minutes. Now, if you've got a big deadline to do, or like a lot of work and you have to be really focused 20 minutes later, you could actually preload with a coffee and then go to sleep. And 20 minutes later, the coffee is starting to peak in your system. So then you wake up and you're really on, yeah? So I'm not a pro coffee, but I'm not an anti coffee. I think 1 or 2 is okay a day. I love it myself, so it's hard to, got to be honest with these things. Now, the third thing that is really, really helpful is relating. So you relating to yourself, so meditation, relating to how your body's feeling, somatic understanding, relating to people who love you and who understand you and who you love and understand, connecting with those people or connecting to the planet, connecting to the earth, the sky, whatever it is that you feel a sense of connection with. So there's a wonderful lifestyle medicine guy, or I think he was one of the guys who started wellness, who helped coin the term wellness, Jack Travis. He says the currency of wellness is connection. So the currency of that energy of wellness moving through your body is when you're connected to yourself and not disassociated. So it's union, it's the same thing, yeah. So yeah, relating every day is also something that's going to really help us, because we're neurobiologically wired to feel connection and to be part of and not to be separate. So they're your 3 things that are more in the relaxation sort of area. And then the other 3 are action things. So things that you can do which are extending yourself and challenging yourself and getting those neural pathways to... So I don't know, when you learn, we all learn differently, but when you learn, like I know I used to get kind of a bit grumpy before I'd understand something. It's like, stupid, it's just stupid. And then suddenly, you stick at it, and then you get it and you think, that's easy. why is that so hard to understand? So we all have a different pattern. That's my pattern. I'm getting past that pattern now that I'm almost 50 and grown up. So the 3 things that I'd suggest that are going to actually allow for that pushing and that new neural pathways, and there are many, doing a couple of degrees doing a degree every 10 years is a good trick, I think. But if you're allowed, if you can. One is dancing. So dancing is so wonderful because it's asymmetrical. Exercise is great, don't get me wrong, exercise and this is all good, but dancing is asymmetrical. It's something that's basically allowing for new movement all the time, and something that the brain and the nervous system and the neuroplasticity has to really do things. So even becoming very wildly gesticulating in what you do in life could also be something that's good because it's making your whole body do things. And when you cross over your body as well, there's a whole heap of neuroplasticity that's going on with that too. So dancing by yourself, there's also music involved with that, which just then sets off a whole heap of other stuff in your brain that really supports that enlivening of your brain, of different parts of your brain. And then if you dance with somebody else, then you've got the whole thing of what are they doing, where are they going, how am I going to dance with them? And so that whole aspect of connecting with another human being is a whole other part of that. So if one thing I think for dementia people who are, showing some signs, is get them dancing with someone, like whatever type of dancing they want. I think that's a really, really key thing to do. Another one is adventures. Have adventures, and whether those adventures are just getting off one stop earlier or parking in a different place and walking through, through different streets of what you normally do, and starting to expand your capacity to explore new things. So when you go on a holiday and you might be away for 2 days and you don't know where your toothbrush is necessarily, you don't know where the toilet is, you don't know where you're going to get water from or food from, and you have just found somewhere to sleep but you don't really know the lay of that, and you don't know the streets, and you've got to figure out where to go, and you don't know all these people, and there's all this new language potentially, all these new foods and all this stuff. 2 days later you feel like you've been away for a week, because you're so present of mind when you're there, and so therefore you're stretching your norms, stretching them out and like really starting to expand and enjoy. So when we have a peak emotional state, our neurons wire together with that peak emotional state. That's why breaking up, I reckon, is so hard, because you have all these peak states with your partner and then you've got to break away from them and it's hard. That's a hypothesis I'm working on. But so if we have really enjoyable times and we're starting to adventure and explore, then that's going to wire better and easier, because the neurons that fire together wire together is one of the neurologists' little bylines. So adventures, lifelong learning, being curious, being present. Brush your teeth with the opposite hand if you can't do anything other than that. Put another shoe on, the other opposite shoe on than you normally would, or things like that, going to help. The final thing is fasting. Now, I am a big advocate for fasting. I think it's a solution that we all can really, really benefit from. Well, maybe not all. If you've got an eating disorder, I suggest, or if you've had a history of eating disorders, I wouldn't suggest fasting for those people, because I know it's just too it's disempowering for those people. But I think for people who are wanting to perhaps lose a little bit of weight, different types of fasting can be fantastic. I have got one of the things that I've created in my career so far is a detox protocol, which is, there's a picture of it at the back there, and you can see that there's actually a couple of steps before you fast, which I think are really important, particularly if you're doing fasting longer than, say, 16 hours, which is a normal intermittent fasting period of time. That's generally okay, but I still think, you should be really looking at your hydration and also your intention and what you're actually doing there, not just to be, doing it without a structure. So please have a look at that preparation process, particularly if you're going for longer fasts. But when we fast to different levels, a whole heap of great things happen. One is that we get more stem cells regenerated, like we get more rejuvenation of stem cells, and that's very exciting. And that's why we rejuvenate with fasting. That's why even after a night of fasting, we wake up. The melatonin is definitely playing a role, but also that fasting is basically bringing more rejuvenation into our body. And the other thing that they've shown in mice brains, because they haven't cut up human brains fortunately, but they fasted a whole heap of mice, and they showed that there's a factor that helps with neuroplasticity and mapping of the brain, which is called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So it's basically just a factor that helps with this neuroplasticity, enhances the capacity for you to learn new things. So fasting, it's a non-doing practice, so it's not eating, you know, it's a non-consumptive thing, so it's actually quite outside of the paradigm that we live in. It's also an incredible spaciousness. It also allows us to put new patterns into place, which would potentially support your own life, or that would potentially support your own life, but also help you with your choices and decision making around what you're going to be purchasing and how you're going to be living in the world. And in a world that is 12 years, they say, with climate change, for 12 years. So if you can really look after your brain and your nervous system, and as I said, there are so many other wonderful ways of doing it. And I hope the 6 that I've given you have given you at least a framework or some sort of an additional insight into that. So thanks very much for your attention.